The morning sun cast golden rays across the crystal gardens of Lunaris Palace, illuminating thousands of flowers in a spectacular display of color and life. Among the carefully cultivated beds and ancient oak trees, a young woman moved with practiced grace, her fingers trailing gently across petals and leaves. Alara hummed softly as she worked, completely absorbed in her task of tending to the royal gardens. At 22 years old, she had spent the last 5 years working in these gardens, finding peace and purpose among the living things that responded so beautifully to her touch. She wore a simple green dress, practical for her work, with her long chestnut hair pulled back in a loose braid. What made Alara truly special, though few knew it, was the gift she carried in her blood. When she touched plants with intention, they responded in ways that defied natural explanation. Flowers bloomed out of eye. Season under her care, dying plants revived with renewed vigor, and seeds sprouted with supernatural speed. She had learned to hide this ability, knowing that anything unusual drew dangerous attention in a kingdom ruled by fear. The kingdom of Lunaris had not always been a place of darkness and terror, but under the rule of the late Alpha King Mordecai, and now his son Kale, it had become exactly that. The werewolf hierarchy was strictly enforced, with alphas holding absolute power, betas serving as soldiers and administrators, and omegas like Alara, relegated to service positions with little hope of advancement. King Kale, who had ascended to the throne 3 years ago at age 25, was known throughout the land as the Crimson King, a name earned through his ruthless suppression of any dissent and his cold, merciless nature. Stories circulated among the palace staff of his complete lack of empathy, his iron control over his emotions, and his terrifying presence that made even the bravest warriors tremble. No one approached the king unless absolutely necessary, and even his highest-ranking officials spoke to him with barely concealed fear. He had never been seen to smile, never shown mercy to those who crossed him, and certainly never demonstrated anything resembling kindness or warmth. Alara knew these stories, of course, but they seemed distant and unreal as she knelt beside a bed of midnight roses, carefully pruning away dead growth to encourage new blooms. She had been orphaned at age 7, when her parents were executed for treason, a memory so painful that she had buried it deep within her mind, remembering only fragments of that terrible night. Raised in the palace orphanage and trained as a gardener, she had learned to find joy in small moments and to believe that kindness, no matter how small, mattered in a world that often seemed devoid of it. This philosophy guided her interactions with everyone she met, from fellow servants to the occasional noble who wandered through the gardens. She believed that every person carried their own burdens, and that a smile or a kind word could make a difference, even if just for a moment. Today was the festival of the first moon, a ceremony held annually to honor the moon goddess and seek her blessing for the kingdom. The gardens had been prepared for weeks, transformed into an even more spectacular display than usual, with rare flowers imported from across the realm and magical lights prepared to illuminate the evening celebration. Alara had worked tirelessly to ensure everything was perfect, taking particular pride in the centerpiece she had created, a magnificent arrangement featuring the incredibly rare moonbloom flowers that only opened under the light of a full moon. These flowers, with their luminescent blue petals and sweet, intoxicating fragrance, were said to carry blessings from the moon goddess herself. Through careful cultivation and her own secret gift, Alara had managed to grow 3 perfect specimens, a feat that should have been impossible given how rarely these flowers bloomed in captivity. As the afternoon progressed, palace staff began setting up for the evening ceremony. Tables were arranged, decorations hung, and guards took their positions around the perimeter. Alara finished her final preparations, stepping back to admire her work with satisfaction. The gardens looked absolutely magnificent, a testament to months of dedicated care and attention. She was just beginning to clean her tools when she heard the sound of heavy footsteps and the immediate hush that fell over everyone nearby. Curious about what could cause such a reaction, she glanced up from her work and felt her heart stop in her chest. Walking along the main garden path, surrounded by a contingent of guards and advisors, was a man who could only be King Kale himself. Ilara had never seen the king in person before. He rarely ventured into the gardens, preferring to remain in the keep where he conducted the business of ruling with ruthless efficiency. Now, seeing him for the first time, she understood why his mere presence inspired such fear. He stood well over 6 feet tall with a powerful build that spoke of both his alpha nature and years of combat training. His hair was dark as midnight, falling just past his shoulders, and his eyes were an unusual shade of silver gray that seemed to pierce through everything they observed. His face was striking, almost painfully handsome, but set in such harsh lines that it looked as if it had been carved from stone. He wore black leather and dark armor, practical rather than ornate, and moved with the lethal grace of a predator who knew he stood at the apex of the food chain. The air around him seemed to vibrate with barely contained power, his alpha aura so strong that several omegas nearby actually whimpered and backed away. Everyone in the vicinity immediately dropped into deep bows, eyes fixed on the ground, not daring to look directly at their king. Ilara, who had been standing by one of the flower beds with her gardening shears still in hand, froze in shock. She had been so absorbed in her work that she had not heard the announcement of the king's approach, and now she found herself standing upright, while everyone else prostrated themselves. For a moment, panic seized her. She knew she should bow, should avert her eyes, should do anything other than stand there staring at the most dangerous man in the kingdom. But something strange happened in that moment of eye contact. King Kale, who had been walking past without paying attention to his surroundings, stopped abruptly when his gaze landed on her, his silver eyes locked with her green ones, and for several heartbeats, neither of them moved. What Ilara saw in that brief moment of connection surprised her beyond measure. Beneath the cold exterior and the terrifying reputation, she glimpsed something unexpected in his eyes. It was not cruelty or malice, but rather a profound emptiness, a loneliness so deep and absolute that it made her heart ache with unexpected sympathy. It reminded her of the look she sometimes saw in the eyes of injured animals, creatures that had been hurt so badly that they no longer knew how to trust or hope. Before she could think better of it, before rationality could override instinct, Ilara did something completely unprecedented and possibly suicidal. She bent down to the moonbloom flowers beside her, carefully snapped off one of the precious blooms she had worked so hard to cultivate, and stepped forward toward the king. The guards immediately moved to intercept her, hands going to their weapons, but King Kale raised one hand in a gesture that stopped them instantly. Ilara, her heart pounding but her face showing only gentle warmth, approached to within a few feet of the king and held out the luminescent blue flower toward him. She smiled, a genuine expression of kindness that reached her eyes, and spoke in a soft voice that somehow carried clearly in the shocked silence. "I thought you might like this, Your Majesty. Moonbloom flowers are very rare, and this one is particularly beautiful. They say that the moon goddess herself blessed these flowers, and that they bring peace to troubled hearts. I hope it brightens your day, even if just a little." The entire garden seemed to hold its breath. Guards stood frozen in positions of readiness. Advisors looked on with expressions of horror, and servants waited for the explosion of rage that would surely follow such presumption. But King Kale did not explode. Instead, he stood completely still, staring at the flower extended toward him, as if it were some alien object he could not comprehend. His silver eyes moved from the delicate blue petals to Ilara's smiling face, then back again, clearly struggling to process what was happening. No one offered him things. People brought him reports, delivered messages, presented tribute from conquered territories. But no one ever simply gave him something with a smile and a wish for his well-being. The concept was so foreign to his experience that his mind could not immediately make sense of it. Slowly, moving as if in a trance, Kale reached out and took the flower from her hand. His fingers, calloused from years of sword work, brushed against hers in the exchange, and something electric seemed to pass between them at the contact. Ilara's smile widened slightly, pleased that he had accepted her offering, completely oblivious to the shocking nature of what had just transpired. She gave a small, respectful nod of her head, not the deep bow of terror that others showed him, but the courteous acknowledgement one might give to any person of rank. And then she stepped back to return to her work as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. King Kale stood frozen for several more seconds, the moonbloom flower held carefully in his hand, his expression still locked in that same unreadable mask, but his eyes showing confusion and something that might have been wonder. Then, without a word, he turned and continued walking, his entourage scrambling to follow. He did not look back, but his fingers remained carefully curved around the delicate flower, protecting it from being crushed. Behind him, the garden erupted into frantic whispers. Ilara, finally realizing the full magnitude of what she had done as the adrenaline wore off, felt her knees go weak. An older gardener named Thomas hurried over to her, his weathered face pale with concern. "Child, do you have any idea what you just did? You approached the king unbidden. You spoke to him without being addressed. You touched him. Any one of those things could be grounds for execution." Ilara swallowed hard, the reality of her impulsive action finally sinking in. "I did not think, Thomas. I just saw someone who looked like they needed a kind gesture, and I acted without considering the consequences." Her voice trembled slightly. "Do you think he will have me punished?" Thomas shook his head slowly, his expression bemused. "If he wanted you punished, child, you would already be in chains. The fact that he accepted your gift and left without saying anything is perhaps the most shocking part of this entire incident. In all my years serving in this palace, I have never seen the king accept anything offered freely, nor have I seen him hesitate in delivering punishment to those who break protocol. Whatever just happened here, it was unprecedented." The old man placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Still, perhaps it would be wise to keep your head down for the next few days. The king's moods are unpredictable, and what seems acceptable in one moment might be viewed differently upon reflection." Ilara nodded, taking the advice to heart, though she could not shake the memory of those silver eyes and the profound loneliness she had glimpsed within them. Something told her that this encounter, however brief, had set something in motion that could not easily be undone. If you are enjoying this story of an unexpected connection between two souls from different worlds, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel for more supernatural romance content. Your support helps us continue creating these tales of love, redemption, and magic. That evening, the festival of the first moon proceeded as planned, with nobles and dignitaries gathering in the transformed gardens to participate in the ancient ceremony. Ilara remained in the background, as was appropriate for someone of her station, but she found her eyes repeatedly drawn to where King Kyle stood on the raised dais, presiding over the festivities with his usual cold demeanor. He wore formal ceremonial armor for the occasion, black and silver that gleamed in the magical lights, and a crown of dark metal that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. Throughout the ceremony, he performed his duties with mechanical precision, speaking the traditional words of blessing and thanksgiving without any visible emotion, accepting the ritual offerings from high-ranking pack members with the same impassive expression he showed to everything else. To anyone watching, he appeared exactly as always, the untouchable and terrifying Alpha King who ruled through fear and absolute authority. But Ilara noticed something that others might have missed. At one point during the ceremony, when King Kale thought no one was watching closely, his hand moved to touch something tucked inside his armor, near his heart. Through a gap in the metal plates, Ilara caught a glimpse of luminescent blue, and she realized with shock that he had kept her moonbloom flower, had apparently placed it somewhere safe where he could carry it with him. The discovery sent a strange flutter through her chest, a feeling she could not quite name. Why would the fearsome Crimson King, who supposedly cared for nothing and no one, preserve a simple flower given to him by a lowly Omega gardener? The question occupied her thoughts for the rest of the evening, even as she helped with the cleanup after the ceremony concluded and the guests departed. Unknown to Ilara, her simple act of kindness had indeed affected King Kale far more profoundly than anyone could have guessed. As he stood through the interminable ceremony, speaking words that held no meaning for him and accepting tributes he did not want, his mind kept returning to that moment in the garden. The girl's smile had been genuine, untainted by fear or calculation, offered freely with no expectation of reward or favor. He could not remember the last time someone had smiled at him like that, could not recall ever experiencing such an interaction in his entire life. His childhood had been a brutal education in power and survival. His father, Alpha King Mordecai, had believed that compassion was weakness, and that an Alpha King must be forged in cruelty to rule effectively. Kale's earliest memories were of harsh training, severe punishments for any display of emotion, and constant reminders that as future king, he could afford no softness, no vulnerability, no human connection that might be exploited by enemies. By the time Kale was 10 years old, he had learned to bury every feeling, to present only cold control to the world, and to trust absolutely no one. His father had arranged for his mother, a gentle Luna queen who had tried to shield her son from the worst of Mordecai's brutality, to be quietly eliminated when Kale was 12, teaching him the ultimate lesson that even family ties meant nothing compared to power. From that point forward, Kale had embraced the darkness completely, becoming exactly what his father wanted, a perfect instrument of dominance and control. When he took the throne at 25 after his father's death in battle, he continued the same policies, ruling through intimidation and swift punishment of any dissent, never questioning whether there might be another way because he had never known anything different. His life was an endless cycle of duty and violence, completely devoid of warmth, connection, or purpose beyond maintaining power. And then a slip of a girl had offered him a flower and wished for his day to be brightened. The gesture should have meant nothing. It was trivial, inconsequential, the kind of empty pleasantry people exchanged without thought, except it had not been empty, and Kale knew it. He had seen the genuine warmth in her eyes, the complete absence of fear or calculation, the simple human kindness offered to someone she perceived as needing it. She had looked at him, at the monster everyone else saw, and had somehow seen a person worthy of a small act of grace. The experience had cracked something inside him, had created a tiny fissure in the walls he had spent decades building around his heart. Now, standing in his private chambers after the ceremony finally ended, Kale carefully removed his armor and withdrew the moonbloom flower from where he had placed it. Despite the hours that had passed, it remained as fresh and luminous as when she had first given it to him, its blue petals glowing softly in the darkness of his room. He set it in a small glass of water on his bedside table, handling it with surprising gentleness, and found himself staring at it for long minutes. What was the girl's name? He realized he did not know, had been so shocked by her approach that he had not thought to inquire. She worked in the gardens. That much was obvious. But beyond that, he knew nothing about her. The realization bothered him more than it should have. Kale told himself that his interest was merely curiosity, that he simply wanted to understand what motivated someone to behave so recklessly, to approach him without fear when even hardened warriors kept their distance. But somewhere deep in the part of himself he had tried to kill, he recognized the lie. He wanted to see her again, wanted to understand how someone could maintain such genuine kindness in a kingdom built on fear and cruelty, wanted to feel again that strange warmth that had spread through his chest when she smiled at him. The desire was dangerous, irrational, and completely inappropriate for a king, but it was there nonetheless, growing stronger with each passing minute. Over the next several days, Kale found himself doing something he had never done before. He began taking walks through the palace gardens at various times of day, telling his guards and advisors that he wanted to personally inspect the grounds, though in truth, he was looking for her. It took 3 days before he finally spotted her again, working in a secluded section of the gardens where herbs and medicinal plants were cultivated. This time, she was kneeling beside a bed of struggling lavender plants, her hands moving gently over the soil. As Kale watched from a distance, hidden in the shadows of a nearby archway, he witnessed something extraordinary. Where her fingers touched, the lavender seemed to revive, color returning to grayish leaves, stems straightening and strengthening. Within minutes, plants that had been on the verge of death were thriving, their purple blooms opening as if responding to her touch. She was using magic, he realized. plant magic of a kind that had supposedly died out decades ago when the old healing covens were disbanded. This revelation added another layer of intrigue to the mystery she represented. The old plant magic had been forbidden under his father's rule, its practitioners hunted down and eliminated as potential threats to the established order. If she possessed such abilities, she should be terrified of discovery. Yet here she was, using her gift openly in the palace gardens. Either she was incredibly foolish, or she trusted that her abilities would go unnoticed among the servants and lower-ranking staff who would have no reason to report her. Kyle realized that he held her life in his hands now. A single word from him, and she would be arrested, interrogated, possibly executed, depending on the extent of her powers and their potential threat to his rule. It would be the rational decision, the safe choice, the action any proper Alpha King would take without hesitation. But even as the thought crossed his mind, Kale knew he would not do it. Instead, he found himself stepping out from the shadows, dismissing his guards with a gesture that sent them retreating to a respectful distance, and approaching her alone. Ilara looked up at the sound of footsteps, and her eyes widened in surprise when she recognized him. She quickly stood, brushing dirt from her dress, and dropped into a proper curtsy this time, having learned her lesson about protocol. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "I apologize if my work here disturbs you. I can return at another time if you wish to have the gardens to yourself." Her voice was respectful, but not fearful, a careful balance that intrigued him. Kale found himself uncertain how to proceed, an unusual experience for someone accustomed to absolute authority. He was skilled at commanding armies, intimidating enemies, and making strategic decisions. But simple social interaction was foreign territory. After a moment of awkward silence, he spoke, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. "The moonbloom flower you gave me, it has not wilted. Most cut flowers die within a day, but this one remains as fresh as when you picked it. How is this possible?" It was not what he had meant to say. He had meant to ask her name, perhaps inquire about her work. But instead, he focused on the practical mystery, because emotions and genuine conversation were beyond his capabilities. Ilara's face brightened at the question, apparently pleased that he had kept her gift. "Moonbloom flowers are special, Your Majesty. They are sustained by lunar magic rather than normal biological processes, so they remain fresh as long as they retain connection to the moon's power. If you place the flower in moonlight each night, it will last indefinitely." She paused, then added with gentle concern, "I hope you did not feel obligated to keep it. It was merely a small gift, freely given with no expectation attached. I only wish to offer you a moment of beauty in what I imagine must be a very demanding existence." Her words were sincere, showing genuine care for his well-being, and Kale felt that strange crack in his defenses widen a little. "More. Why did you approach me that day?" he asked, genuinely perplexed. "You must have known it was dangerous, that I could have had you punished for such presumption. What possessed you to take such a risk for someone you do not know? Especially someone with my reputation?" He watched her face carefully, looking for signs of deception or hidden motives, but found only thoughtful consideration as she pondered his question. Ilara tilted her head slightly, her green eyes meeting his directly in a way that few dared. "I suppose I did not think of it as a risk, Your Majesty. I saw someone who looked lonely, and I had something beautiful that might bring them a moment of happiness. It seemed like the natural thing to do." She smiled softly. "As for your reputation, I have learned that reputations often tell us more about what people fear than about who someone truly is. Everyone deserves kindness, regardless of their station or the stories told about them." Her answer was so startlingly honest and naive that Kale did not know how to respond. She spoke as if kindness was a natural force like gravity, something that simply existed and should be shared freely without calculation or caution. It was a worldview so alien to his own experience that he struggled to comprehend it. "You realize I could be exactly as dangerous as my reputation suggests," he said, testing her. "I have executed people for far less than breaking protocol in my presence. Your innocent gesture could have ended very badly. For you, The words were meant as a warning, perhaps even an attempt to frighten her into more appropriate caution. But Alara simply nodded thoughtfully. "I suppose that is true, Your Majesty," she agreed calmly. "But if I had let fear prevent me from offering you that flower, then both of us would have missed a nice moment. You would not have received something beautiful, and I would not have had the pleasure of seeing you accept it with such care. Whatever consequences might have followed, I think that moment was worth the risk." Kale stared at her, completely baffled by her logic. She had risked her life for a nice moment. The concept was so foreign to him that it might as well have been in another language. And yet, some part of him understood what she meant. That brief exchange had indeed been pleasant, perhaps the only genuinely pleasant interpersonal interaction he had experienced in years. He found himself wanting more such moments, wanting to understand how this young woman had maintained such an open heart in a world that should have crushed it long ago. Almost without conscious decision, he asked a question that surprised him, even as the words left his mouth. "What is your name?" "Ilara," she replied simply. "Ilara Thorne, though most people just call me Ilara." She hesitated, then asked tentatively, "May I ask what brings you to the gardens today, Your Majesty? You do not usually visit this section, or so I am told." "I wanted to inspect the grounds," Kale replied, falling back on the excuse he had prepared, though it sounded weak even to his own ears. "And I wished to see how you managed to cultivate the moonbloom flowers so successfully. They are notoriously difficult to grow." He gestured at the garden around them. "Your work here is impressive. The gardens have never looked better." It was true, though he had not consciously registered it before. Under her care, the palace grounds had become almost supernaturally beautiful, flourishing in ways that should not be possible given the kingdom's gradually declining health. The compliment brought a genuine smile to Alara's face, and she looked around the gardens with obvious pride and affection. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I love this work. There is something deeply satisfying about nurturing life, about helping things grow and thrive. Every plant has its own needs and personality, and when you learn to understand them, they respond with such beauty." She glanced at him curiously. "Do you have any interest in gardening yourself, or does your role keep you too occupied with other matters?" The question was so normal, so utterly mundane, that Kale found himself answering honestly before his guard could slam back into place. "I have never considered it. My education focused on combat, strategy, governance, and diplomacy. Activities like gardening were deemed unnecessary for someone in my position." He paused, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. "But I find myself appreciating the results of your work. There is a peace here that exists nowhere else in the palace." Ilara's expression softened with understanding. "Everyone needs peace, Your Majesty. The weight of ruling an entire kingdom must be incredibly heavy. I imagine there are very few places where you can simply exist without the burden of constant duty and decision-making. If the gardens provide even a small respite from that, then I am glad." She hesitated, then added boldly, "You are welcome to visit whenever you wish. I am here most days from dawn until dusk, and I would be happy to show you the different sections if you ever have time and interest." The offer was extended with such genuine warmth and lack of expectation that Kale felt something tighten in his chest. When was the last time someone had invited him to simply spend time in their presence, with no ulterior motive or formal purpose? He could not remember such an instance ever occurring. Every interaction in his life was transactional, tied to duty or power, dynamics. The idea of visiting the gardens just to see the plants, and perhaps to see her, was so strange and appealing that he found himself nodding acceptance before he could think better of it. "I may take you up on that offer," he said quietly. "For now, I should return to my duties. But thank you, Ilara, for your time and for your continued excellent work." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at her. "And thank you for the flower. I have placed it by my window where it catches the moonlight each night." The smile she gave him in response to those words was radiant, completely unguarded and full of genuine pleasure. "I am so glad you are enjoying it, Your Majesty. May it bring you many peaceful nights." As Kale walked away, his guards falling into formation around him once more, He found himself thinking that he would very much like to see that smile again. Something was changing inside him, some long-frozen part of his soul beginning to thaw. And while the logical part of his mind recognized the danger in this development, he could not bring himself to care. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something other than empty coldness, and the sensation was addictive. True to his unspoken intention, Kyle began visiting the gardens regularly. Always alone except for guards positioned at discreet distances, always seeking out the sections where Alara worked. At first, their interactions were brief and somewhat awkward as he struggled with the basic mechanics of casual conversation. But Alara, with her natural warmth and apparent inability to treat him with the fearful deference everyone else showed, gradually drew him out. She told him about the plants she tended, explaining their properties and the care they required with enthusiasm that was genuinely infectious. She shared stories from her childhood in the palace orphanage, carefully editing out the worst parts, but conveying a sense of community and simple joys found in difficult circumstances. She asked him questions about his life, and when he deflected or gave minimal answers, she did not press but simply accepted what he was willing to share. For Kale, these visits became the highlight of his days. For a few precious minutes, or sometimes hours, he could remove the mask he wore constantly and simply exist in the presence of someone who saw him as a person, rather than a symbol of fear and power. Alara never asked him for anything, never tried to leverage their growing acquaintance into favors or advantages, never showed any sign that she wanted anything from him beyond his company. It was a novelty so profound that he found himself telling her things he had never spoken aloud, sharing opinions about governance and frustrations about the limitations of his power, admitting to uncertainties and doubts that would be seen as fatal weakness if expressed to anyone else. And Alara listened with genuine interest, offering perspectives that were sometimes naive but always came from a place of sincere thought and care. Over the course of several weeks, something shifted between them. The formal distance that Kyle had insisted upon began to erode, replaced by a tentative friendship that grew stronger with each conversation. Alara learned to read his moods, understanding when he needed silence and when he wanted to talk, when his harsh words came from frustration rather than anger, when the tension in his shoulders meant he was dealing with particularly difficult matters of state. Kale, for his part, discovered that he looked forward to her smiles, her gentle teasing when she thought he was being too serious, her absolute certainty that people were fundamentally good, even when evidence suggested otherwise. She challenged him in ways no one else dared, questioning his assumptions and offering alternative viewpoints, but she did so with such obvious good faith that he found himself considering her words rather than dismissing them out of hand. It was during one of these visits, about a month after their first meeting, that Kale made a discovery that complicated everything. He had arrived at the gardens earlier than usual, hoping to catch Alara before she became absorbed in her work. He found her in the meditation garden, a secluded area surrounded by high hedges and ancient trees, and was about to announce his presence when he saw what she was doing. She knelt in the center of a circle of dying rose bushes, her hands pressed to the earth, and her eyes closed in concentration. As Kale watched, frozen in shock, a soft green light began to emanate from her hands, spreading through the soil and up into the plants. Before his eyes, the roses transformed from brittle, browning stems to lush, healthy bushes covered in blooms of impossible colors, deep purples and midnight blues that roses should not naturally possess. When Alara opened her eyes and saw him standing there, the color drained from her face. She scrambled to her feet, her expression caught between fear and resignation, clearly expecting the worst. "Your Majesty?" she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I can explain." But Kale raised a hand to stop her, his mind racing through implications and possibilities. "The old plant magic," he said slowly, his silver eyes fixed on her intently. "You are a practitioner of the ancient healing arts. How long have you possessed this ability? And why have you kept it hidden?" His tone was not accusatory, but genuinely curious, though Alara had no way of knowing whether that curiosity might lead to her arrest. Alara took a deep breath, visibly steeling herself to be honest. I have had this gift since I was a child, Your Majesty. It manifested when I was very young, and I learned to hide it after I saw what happened to others who displayed unusual abilities. She met his gaze directly, showing the same courage she had displayed when she first approached him. I know that such magic is forbidden, that your father declared it dangerous and ordered all practitioners eliminated. I have lived in fear of discovery for years, but I could not stop using my gift entirely. The plants needed help, and I could provide it, so I used my abilities carefully, in places where I thought no one would notice. Her voice steadied as she continued. If you intend to punish me for this transgression, I understand. I broke the law, and there must be consequences. But please know that I never used my magic to harm anyone or anything. I only ever used it to heal and nurture life. Kale absorbed this confession, noting her bravery in admitting the truth rather than offering denials or excuses. His father would have indeed executed her without hesitation, viewing any form of unauthorized magic as a potential threat to the throne. But Kale was not his father, regardless of how closely he had tried to follow Mordecai's example, and meeting Alara had begun to show him that perhaps there were flaws in the rigid system he had inherited. Looking at her now, this young woman who used forbidden magic only to create beauty and promote life, he could not see a threat. If anything, her gifts were exactly what the kingdom needed. The land itself was slowly dying, productivity declining year by year, and the royal advisors attributed it to natural cycles rather than addressing the underlying cause, that the brutal suppression of natural magic had severed the kingdom's connection to the sources of life and renewal. I am not going to punish you, Kale said finally, watching relief flood Alara's features. Your magic is being used to heal and nurture, not to harm. That is evident in everything around us. He gestured at the transformed rose bushes and the thriving gardens beyond. The old laws were made in a time of paranoia and suspicion. Perhaps they are due for reconsideration. Alara stared at him in shock, clearly not having expected such a response. You would change the laws? She asked tentatively. But the prohibition on healing magic has been in place for decades. Your father believed it was necessary for stability. Kale's expression hardened at the mention of his father. My father believed many things that I am beginning to question. A kingdom that suppresses the ability to heal and create life is a kingdom that will eventually destroy itself. I see that now, though I was blind to it before. He stepped closer to her, closing the distance between them until he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. You made me question my assumptions, Alara. From the moment you offered me that flower, you have challenged everything I thought I knew about how the world works. You show kindness where you should show fear. You trust where you should be suspicious. You give freely when others scheme for advantage. And somehow, despite everything this kingdom has become, you have remained fundamentally good. I find myself wondering what kind of king I might be if I tried to rule with even a fraction of your compassion. The admission was more vulnerable than anything he had ever said to another person, and he saw understanding dawn in her eyes. Comment below if you believe that love has the power to transform even the most hardened heart, and share this story with someone who appreciates tales of unexpected connection and redemption. Alara reached out tentatively and placed her hand over his where it rested at his side, the gesture sending warmth flooding through him. You are already more than you think you are, she said softly. The fact that you question yourself, that you consider there might be a better way, that alone makes you different from what you were raised to be. Change is possible, Your Majesty, even for someone who has known only darkness. Look at these roses. They were dying, but with care and the right kind of magic, they transformed into something more beautiful than they ever were before. The same principle applies to people and kingdoms. It is never too late to choose a different path. Her words, simple and sincere, struck something deep within him, and Kale found himself doing something he had not done since childhood. He allowed himself to hope. The relationship between them shifted after that day. What had been friendship deepened into something more complex and intense, Though neither of them spoke openly about the changing nature of their bond, Cale continued his visits, but now he sought her out, not just for pleasant conversation, but for her perspective on matters of governance and policy. He began to see the kingdom through her eyes, recognizing injustices and cruelties that he had previously accepted as necessary. Ilara, for her part, found herself drawn to the man beneath the crown, seeing past his harsh exterior to the damaged soul beneath. She recognized in him someone who had never been taught how to be happy, who had survived by killing off every gentle part of himself, and who was now struggling to recover feelings and connections he had thought forever lost. It was inevitable, perhaps, that deeper feelings would develop. Kyle tried to deny what was happening, tried to maintain appropriate distance, but his resistance crumbled a little more with each passing day. He found himself thinking of Ilara constantly when they were apart, anticipating their meetings with an eagerness that had nothing to do with duty or obligation. He noticed everything about her, the way sunlight caught in her hair, the sound of her laughter, the gentle strength in her hands as she tended her plants, the way her entire face lit up when she smiled at him. He memorized the cadence of her voice, the scent of flowers that always clung to her, the precise shade of green in her eyes, and he recognized with growing certainty and no small amount of fear that what he felt for her went far beyond simple attraction or admiration. For Ilara, the realization came more gradually, but no less powerfully. She had begun by seeing Kyle as someone who needed kindness, viewing their interactions as a service she could provide to someone starved for basic human warmth. But as she came to know him better, as he slowly revealed the person he kept hidden beneath layers of protective coldness, she discovered qualities that inspired not just sympathy, but genuine affection and respect. He was intelligent and thoughtful, taking seriously the weight of responsibility that rested on his shoulders. He possessed a dry wit that emerged in unguarded moments, making her laugh with unexpected observations. He listened when she spoke, truly listened, treating her opinions with consideration rather than dismissal, despite their vast difference in station. And beneath the hardness forged by a brutal upbringing, she sensed a capacity for deep feeling that had been suppressed but never entirely destroyed. The turning point came on a night when the full moon hung heavy in the sky, casting silver light across the gardens. Ilara was working, late, having lost track of time while preparing a new section for planting. She was surprised when Cale appeared, dressed in simple dark clothing, rather than his usual formal attire, his guards nowhere in sight. "You are here late," he observed, a note of concern in his voice. "Is everything all right?" Ilara smiled and straightened from her work, brushing dirt from her hands. "I simply became absorbed in what I was doing. The moonlight makes this the perfect time to plant certain herbs that draw power from lunar energy." She gestured at the moon above. "Beautiful night, is it not?" Cale looked up at the moon, his expression unreadable. "I suppose it is. I rarely take time to notice such things." Ilara studied his face in the moonlight, noting the tension in his jaw and the shadows under his eyes. "You look troubled," she said gently. "Did something happen today?" Cale was silent for a long moment, clearly debating how much to reveal. Finally he spoke, his voice rough with emotion he could not quite contain. "I received a report today about conditions in the Southern Territories. Families are starving because the land no longer produces adequate harvests. Children are dying of preventable illnesses because healers with the knowledge to help them were driven away or executed years ago. The people suffer, and it is because of policies I have enforced without question, continuing what my father began." He turned to look at her, raw anguish visible in his silver eyes. "How many have died because I was too blind or too cowardly to see that the old ways were destroying us? How do I live with that knowledge?" Ilara's heart ached at the pain in his voice. She stepped closer to him, closing the distance until they stood only inches apart. "You live with it by choosing to change things now," she said firmly, "by being brave enough to acknowledge past mistakes and commit to doing better, by using your power to heal instead of harm." She reached up and cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You are not your father, Cale. You are not bound by his choices or his worldview. You have the power to choose differently, to create a kingdom built on compassion rather than fear. It will be difficult, and there will be those who resist change, but I believe you are capable of it. And you do not have to do it alone. Her use of his name rather than his title, a liberty she had taken to using when they were alone, emphasized the personal nature of her faith in him. Cale stared down at her, at this extraordinary woman who believed in him despite every reason not to, who saw potential for good in someone universally feared and reviled, who offered support and understanding without asking anything in return. Something broke inside him, the last wall around his heart crumbling under the weight of emotions he could no longer suppress or deny. Before he could second-guess the action, before rationality could intervene, he bent his head and kissed her. The kiss was tentative at first, almost questioning, giving her the opportunity to pull away if she wished. But Alara did not pull away. Instead, she rose on her toes and kissed him back, her arms sliding around his neck, accepting what he offered, and offering her own feelings in return. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Cale rested his forehead against hers, his hands at her waist keeping her close. "This is madness," he murmured, though he made no move to release her. "I am the king, and you are an Omega Gardener. Such a relationship violates every tradition and expectation. It would cause scandal and could put you in danger from those who would see you as an inappropriate influence on me. I should not want this, should not feel what I feel, but I cannot help myself anymore. You have become essential to me, Alara. Your kindness, your faith, your presence, they are the only things that make my existence bearable. Tell me to stop this now, to walk away before we go further down this path, because I do not have the strength to do it on my own." Alara pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, her own shining with emotion. "I do not want you to stop," she whispered. "I do not care about tradition or scandal or appropriate matches. I care about you, Cale. The man you are, and the man you are becoming. Whatever consequences come from this, we will face them together." She smiled, that same warm, genuine smile that had captured his attention from the very beginning. "Besides, I have been breaking conventions my entire life. Why stop now?" Her attempt at lightness made him laugh, a real laugh free of bitterness, perhaps the first such sound he had made in years. He kissed her again, deeper this time, pouring into the embrace all the feelings he had never learned to express in words. They both knew, on some level, that this development complicated an already complex situation. A relationship between the Alpha King and an Omega servant was unprecedented and would cause significant upheaval if it became public knowledge. Beyond the social implications, there were political considerations and potential dangers neither of them fully understood yet. But in that moment, standing in the moonlit garden with the scent of flowers surrounding them and the taste of each other's kiss still on their lips, they allowed themselves to simply feel without worrying about consequences. For Kyle, it was the first time he had allowed himself to want something for purely personal reasons, rather than strategic necessity. For Alara, it was the recognition that her growing feelings for him had developed into something deep and irrevocable, a love that would not be easily denied or dismissed. Their relationship, once acknowledged, developed quickly, despite the need for secrecy. Cale began spending even more time in the gardens, often late at night, when fewer eyes might observe them together. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, sharing dreams and fears, debating philosophy and politics, learning the details of each other's lives and thoughts. Cale told her about his childhood, speaking for the first time about the abuse and manipulation that had shaped him, the impossible standards his father had enforced, the brutal lessons in dominance and control. Alara listened without judgment, offering comfort and understanding, helping him process trauma he had buried for so long that he had forgotten it was there. In return, she told him about her own past, including fragments of memories from the night her parents died, memories that had never fully formed, but that left her with lingering nightmares and a sense of loss she could never quite articulate. It was during one of these late-night conversations that Kyle decided to investigate Alara's background more thoroughly. Something about her fragmented memories troubled him, a nagging sense that there was more to the story of her parents' execution than standard treason charges. He discreetly ordered his most trusted advisor to review the old records, to find out exactly who Alara's parents had been and what they had supposedly done to warrant execution. When the report came back 3 days later, Cale felt his blood run cold as he read the details. Alara's parents, Marcus and Lyra Thorne, had been members of the Verdant Circle, a group of healing practitioners who had advocated for the preservation of natural magic and peaceful coexistence between different magical traditions. They had been executed under orders from King Mordecai not for treason in any real sense, but because they had refused to give up their practices and had publicly criticized the king's increasingly harsh policies. But the most devastating detail was buried in the execution records. The order for their arrest and execution had been carried out by a young Captain Cale, then 22 years old and recently returned from military training. He had led the squad that stormed their home, had personally overseen their capture, and had been present at their execution. The report noted that a child had been found in the home, a 7-year-old daughter who had witnessed the entire event. That child had been sent to the palace orphanage, her identity deliberately obscured to prevent any future attempts at revenge or the formation of sympathy for the executed rebels. That child was Alara. Kyle sat in his private study, the report clutched in his shaking hands, and felt the weight of this revelation crushing down on him. He had killed Alara's parents. Not directly, perhaps, as the actual executioner had been someone else, but he had arrested them, had carried out his father's orders without question, had condemned them to death without even considering whether they deserved such a fate. And Alara, the woman he had come to love, the person who showed him kindness when he had never known it, did not know that he was responsible for the defining tragedy of her childhood. The knowledge was unbearable. Every instinct screamed at him to keep this information hidden, to destroy the report and never speak of it, but he knew he could not do that. Their relationship, fragile and precious as it was, could not be built on such a fundamental lie. That night, when Alara met him in the gardens as she now did regularly, she immediately sensed that something was wrong. His expression was more closed off than she had seen in weeks, and tension radiated from every line of his body. "Cale, what has happened?" she asked with concern, reaching for his hand. "Whatever it is, we can face it together." Cale gently pulled his hand away, and the gesture sent alarm shooting through her. He looked at her with an expression of such anguish and guilt that she felt her heart begin to pound with dread. "Alara, there is something I must tell you. Something about your past and my role in it. You deserve to know the truth, even though it will likely destroy what we have found together." His voice was rough, each word seeming to cost him tremendous effort. Over the next agonizing minutes, Kyle told her everything. He explained about her parents, about who they had been and why they had been targeted, and about his role in their capture and execution. He held nothing back, presenting the facts with brutal honesty, even as he saw her face drain of color and her eyes fill with shock and growing horror. When he finished, a terrible silence fell between them. Alara stared at him as if seeing him, for the first time, processing the revelation that the man she loved was also the person responsible for orphaning her and destroying her family. "You killed my parents," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "All these weeks, I have been falling in love with the man who murdered my mother and father." Her legs seemed to give out, and she sank to the ground, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold herself together. Cale knelt beside her, not touching, but desperately wanting to, his own face wet with tears he did not bother to hide. "I am so sorry, Alara. I cannot undo what I did. I cannot bring them back or erase the pain I caused you. I was following orders, but that is no excuse. I should have questioned, should have refused, should have been strong enough to stand against injustice even when it came from my own father. I was a coward and a monster, and I understand if you can never forgive me, but you deserve to know the truth." His voice broke on the last words, and he sat back, waiting for her judgment. for the rage and hatred that would surely follow. But Alara did not rage at him. Instead, she sat in stunned silence, her mind racing through memories and revelations. She remembered fragments from that terrible night, remembered armored men breaking into their home, her mother's screams, her father trying to protect them, and she remembered Silver Eyes, younger and colder than they were now, belonging to the man who led the soldiers. She had not consciously retained that detail, had buried it with the rest of the trauma, but now it surfaced with devastating clarity. "Those were your eyes," she said softly. "I remember them now. I saw you that night, though I was too young to understand who you were or what was happening. You looked at me for just a moment before they took me away, and even then, even as a child terrified beyond comprehension, I remember thinking that you looked sad." She raised her eyes to meet his. "Were you sad, Kale? Even then, did some part of you know that what you were doing was wrong?" The question surprised him, and he searched his memories of that night for honest answers. "I do not know," he admitted. "I was trained to suppress such feelings, to see only duty and obedience, but I remember that arrest differently from others I performed. I remember a little girl with green eyes, screaming for her mother, and feeling something twist in my chest that I could not identify. I told myself it was nothing, buried it along with every other inconvenient emotion. But perhaps you are right. Perhaps some part of me knew even then." He risked reaching out to touch her hand gently. "That does not excuse what I did. Nothing can excuse it. But I want you to know that meeting you, learning who you are and what you survived, has shown me the full cost of my blind obedience. You are living proof of what my actions destroyed, and I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life." Alara looked down at their joined hands, at the physical connection between the man who had destroyed her family and the woman she had become. She felt a maelstrom of emotions, grief for parents she barely remembered, anger at the injustice that had taken them from her, betrayal at discovering Kale's role in her tragedy, but also something more complicated. She recognized that the young Captain Kale who had arrested her parents was not the same person as the man kneeling before her now. People changed. She had seen Kale change dramatically, even in the few months since they met. He had been raised in violence and cruelty, taught that compassion was weakness, forced to become the instrument of his father's tyranny. And yet, when offered genuine kindness, he had responded by questioning everything he had been taught, by trying to become something better. Could she condemn him for actions taken when he was as much a victim of circumstance as she had been? Finally, she spoke, her voice steadier than she would have expected given the turmoil inside her. "I will not lie and say this does not hurt, because it does. Knowing that you were there that night, that your hands helped take away the only family I ever knew, it breaks something inside me." She squeezed his hand, not releasing it despite the pain. "But I also know that you are not that person anymore. The man who arrested my parents would never have questioned his actions or felt guilt over following orders. He would not have allowed an Omega to speak to him as an equal or considered changing laws that benefit those in power at the expense of the powerless. You are becoming someone different, Kale. Someone better. And I believe that transformation is genuine." She paused, tears streaming down her own face now. "I do not know if I can forgive you. Not yet. Perhaps not ever completely. But I do not want to lose you either. That terrifies me because it feels like a betrayal of my parents' memory. But it is the truth." Kyle pulled her into his arms then, and they held each other as they both wept, grieving for her parents, for his lost childhood, for the years of pain and damage that stood between them, for the impossibility of their situation. When they finally pulled apart, both emotionally exhausted, they looked at each other with new understanding. This would not be easy. The revelation had created a wound that would take a long time to heal, if it ever fully healed, but they had survived it, had chosen honesty over comfortable lies, and that meant something. "We should take things slowly," Ilara said quietly. "I need time to process this, to reconcile my feelings for you with the knowledge of what you did, and you need to continue the work of becoming the king this realm needs. making amends through action rather than just words. Can we do that? Can we move forward together despite this terrible connection between us? Kale nodded, relief and determination warring in his expression. We can try. That is all I can promise, that I will try every day to be worthy of a second chance, to use my power to heal the damage my family has inflicted on this kingdom. He stood and helped her to her feet. And I will give you all the time and space you need. I will not pressure you for more than you can give. Whatever happens between us going forward, I want you to know that meeting you has changed my life. You showed me that there is another way to exist, that kindness and compassion are not weakness, but strength. Whatever else happens, I am grateful for that gift. They parted that night with uncertainty hanging between them, both aware that their relationship had fundamentally shifted. But as Kale walked back to the palace and Ilara returned to her quarters, both felt the same conviction. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever pain and complication this revelation had introduced, they were not ready to give up on each other. The connection between them was too strong, too transformative, to abandon without fighting for it. In the days that followed, they fell into a new pattern. They still met in the gardens, but less frequently, and with a carefulness that had not existed before. Ilara needed space to work through her complex emotions, and Kale respected that boundary while making it clear through his actions that he remained committed to change. He began implementing reforms, starting with a decree that rescinded his father's prohibition on healing magic, and invited practitioners who had fled or gone into hiding to return without fear of persecution. The announcement sent shockwaves through the kingdom and earned him fierce opposition from conservative factions within the nobility who saw any deviation from traditional policies as dangerous weakness. But Kale stood firm, and with each new reform he implemented, with each decision made in favor of compassion rather than control, he felt himself becoming more aligned with the person he wanted to be, rather than the person he had been shaped into. Ilara watched these changes from a distance, seeing his genuine commitment to transformation, and slowly, painfully, she felt her anger and sense of betrayal begin to ease. She could not forget what he had done, would always carry the scar of that loss, but she could see that he was sincere in his efforts to atone and to prevent such tragedies from occurring in the future, and she found that her love for him, rather than being destroyed by the revelation, had somehow deepened into something more mature and realistic, a love that acknowledged the darkness in both their paths while still believing in the possibility of light. If you are moved by this complex journey of love, forgiveness, and redemption, please subscribe to see how Ilara and Kale's story continues to unfold. Your engagement helps us create more content, exploring the depths of human connection and transformation. 3 months after the devastating revelation, Ilara finally approached Kale with a request. She wanted to visit her parents' grave, a place she had never been because she had not known its location. Kale, who had located the unmarked burial site in the palace cemetery, agreed immediately and offered to accompany her. Together, they stood before the simple stone he had commissioned, bearing the names Marcus and Lyra Thorne, and an inscription, "Healers who loved their daughter and believed in a better world." Ilara knelt and placed her hands on the earth, and Kale watched as her magic flowed into the ground, causing flowers to spring up and bloom, creating a permanent memorial of living beauty. As she worked, tears streaming down her face, she spoke to her parents, as if they could hear her. "I hope you can forgive me for loving him," she whispered. "I hope you understand that he is not the man who arrested you, that he is trying to build the world you dreamed of. I think you would see in him what I see, someone with the potential for great good, if only given the chance to choose it." When she finished, the grave was surrounded by moonbloom flowers, glowing softly even in daylight, a tribute more fitting than any monument of stone could be. Kale knelt beside her and added his own words. "I cannot ask your forgiveness, Marcus and Lyra Thorne, for I do not deserve it. But I swear to you on my honor that I will spend the rest of my life trying to create a kingdom where no child suffers as your daughter suffered, where magic is celebrated rather than feared, where justice is tempered with mercy. Your daughter has shown me what it means to be truly strong, and I will honor her and your memory by becoming the king this realm needs." Elara looked at him, tears still wet on her cheeks, and took his hand. They stood together in silence for a long time, sharing grief and hope in equal measure. When they finally left the cemetery, something between them had shifted again, not back to what it was before, but forward into something new. They had faced the worst truth of their shared past, and had chosen not to let it destroy them. It was a foundation, painful but solid, on which they could build whatever came next. But their story was far from over, and darker revelations still lay ahead. Unbeknownst to either Elara or Kale, forces within the kingdom were moving against them, disturbed by the king's reforms, and determined to restore the old order by any means necessary. And at the center of this conspiracy was someone who knew far more about Elara's true nature and her connection to the kingdom's fate than either of them could possibly imagine. The real test of their love and commitment was only beginning, to be continued in Part 2, where Elara's true identity as the last daughter of the moon is revealed. A powerful faction attempts to use her for their own purposes, and Kale must choose between his throne and the woman he loves, in a conflict that will determine the future of the entire kingdom.